Today, Yamaha announced a big update for their Tracer 9 Sports Tourer lineup with a couple of interesting new features that really do bring it bang up to date. So here we go with all of the details and the 10 key things that you need to know about it. Now there are 3 bikes in the Tracer 9 lineup, so there's the standard Tracer 9, the GT model, and the super techie GT Plus. And all of them get a slightly new look for 2025 with this revised bodywork. Now it is more of an evolution than a big revolution. But on top of this ever so slightly more modern aesthetic, it does come with a few practical benefits. So one of them is the fact they've put it through the wind tunnel, and so they say that the airflow is now even more optimized around the rider and passenger, and they've also reshaped the windscreen to try and reduce pressure in behind it, which should give you a little bit less buffeting. Then, on top of that, they've also changed the bodywork around the fork to give it a bit more clearance, and that allows for a little more steering lock, which brings the minimum turning circle down from 3.1 meters to 2.9. It also features though this new bodywork, and I'm sure you'll have noticed this if you've seen the pictures. What they say is the most advanced headlight ever seen on a motorcycle. You'd hope so as well, because it is a bit of a trade-off for the looks. I wouldn't say it's the best looking bike from the front, but basically what you've got is a matrix of both low and high beam LEDs, and then a camera mounted just above them that measures a whole bunch of environmental factors like traffic or light sources or weather conditions. Basically, it processes all that and tries to dynamically adjust the brightness and the beam pattern of the headlight to give you the best possible lighting at all times, no matter what the conditions. And it even ties into the inertial measurement unit, so it's lean sensitive as well. I am really interested to get your thoughts on this and whether you do think it's worth it for the slightly worse looks, I'd say, than the previous generation. And also, would you want to hand that control over to a camera? They do say though, while it is fully automated, you can adjust the sensitivity of it, and also you can manually override it at any time. So yeah, externally it does look a bit different, although under the covers a lot of the bikers stayed the same, and I think that's possibly a good thing because it was a great starting point anyway. The CP3 inline triple engine, for example, didn't really need any messing with because it's a brilliant performer in many bikes in the Yamaha lineup, and peak power and torque figures are pretty much the same, I think, at 119 PS and 93 Nm of peak torque. For me, it's just the perfect engine for a bike like this because it's got bags of mid-range, so it feels sporty and lively when you want it to, but also it's smooth and refined enough for that more chilled out and easygoing cruising. Now wrapped around it, we've got their aluminium Delta Box frame, which again I think is carried over year, as is a lot of the chassis and componentry, so you've still got the 17-inch wheels front and rear, despite the fact that it's got that slightly tall adventure-y stance. And again, they're spin forged, which is a technique that Yamaha used to make them super thin at the rim and nice and light, whilst also maintaining a required level of strength. All 3 bikes get adjustable KYB suspension, although the GT and the GT Plus are both electronically controlled, and again brakes are 4-piston radially mounted calipers on 2 98mm discs up front. And so yeah, I'm not expecting a huge amount of change in terms of the riding dynamics, but having tested out the previous generation last year in Sicily, you know, it was already a fantastic bike to ride. Where it has changed a bit is with the ergonomics, and a lot of that stems back to the fact that they've given it a new subframe design. So they say that although it's 150 grams lighter than the previous generation, it's actually 50mm longer, which is of course going to give both the rider and the passenger a little bit more room. Then they've redesigned the seat to make it a little flatter, and also given it more padding to give it more comfort. And they also say that despite the fact that the seat height has gone up really quite a lot, so it's now 845mm in its low setting, I think it was 820 before, well, they still think it's going to be easier for most riders to get their feet down because they've narrowed it so much at the front of the saddle, so the standover should actually be better. On top of that, they've changed the bar and foot peg positions, they've been tweaked a little bit as well, and so look, although I didn't find the previous generation particularly uncomfortable, certainly looking forward to testing this one out and seeing if it's any better over distance. Perhaps the most significant update though is the fact that the Tracer 9 will now be offered with their YAMT system, or automated manual transmission. We've recently seen it announced on the MT-09 and the MT-07 nakeds, and so it's only natural that it will roll out to more and more Yamaha bikes over the next year or two. The basic idea is that an electronic actuator takes over each of the clutch and gearbox, and so the bike can be run in an automatic mode where it does all of the clutch and gear shifts on your behalf. There's no physical clutch lever or shifter down by your left foot, although you can still run it in a manual mode, but you just choose the gears yourself with the buttons on the switchgear. Now, I've actually ridden it recently on the MT-09 and it really is impressive. It's very slick and the gear shifts are quite satisfying, but I'm not really sure that it massively suits the MT-09's intended use as like a sporty naked. A super techie bike, on the other hand, like the Tracer 9 GT Plus, well, that feels more appropriate to me. And I can also imagine it'll come in handy occasionally when you're doing big miles on a touring bike like this. Now, it won't be available on the base model, and on the GT you'll have to pay to upgrade to it. But for the GT Plus at the top of the lineup, it actually comes as standard fit and there isn't another option. Now look, on the one hand, that bike is absolutely dripping with the latest gadgets and gizmos, so it makes sense to package it in. But on the other, you know, there might still be people who want radar tech, for example, but not an automated gearbox, and so it's just worth pointing out that that doesn't really seem to be an option. In fact, speaking of those radars, well, this was previously the Tracer 9 GT Plus, one of the most technologically advanced bikes on the market, owing to the fact that the front-facing radar opened up their adaptive cruise control system, which tied into almost every facet of the bike. You see, if the radar detected that you were getting close to traffic, it'd first roll off the throttle, if you will, and use the engine braking to try and slow down. But if that wasn't enough, it could also call on the link braking system to apply a little bit of pressure. And while it was doing all that, it could use the electronically controlled suspension to make sure that the bike stayed level and composed while it was decelerating. Really impressive stuff, and like I say, I tried it out on the launch and it behaved really well in a lot of different scenarios, and so certainly one to look at if you're doing a lot of miles and like the idea of a bit more assistance from the bike. One thing it did seem like it was missing though was blind spot warnings from the rear, and it was a bit of a surprise because it was a feature that was fairly widely available on some of the competition. New for 2025 though, it does get a rear-facing radar, and so that opens up the little lights in the mirror that illuminate when someone's sitting off in your rear three-quarter. So yeah, I think this is a good update. For me, it's one of the most useful radar-powered rider aids, and it's just a useful little nudge when you check your mirror that there might be something there that you're not seeing physically in the mirror itself. Most of this techie stuff was previously controlled on a 7-inch TFT display, which has all of the usual different layouts and connectivity that you'd expect from a modern-day bike. But it now comes, and this will be music to some people's ears, as standard on all three bikes in the lineup, whereas the base model and I think the GT as well previously got this slightly unusual split TFT design, which I think was a bit of an acquired taste. This is a much more typical single TFT display, which is much more similar to other bikes on the market, and I think it's going to be easier to use and easier to read for the majority of people. And they've also fitted these bikes with updated switchgear, which they say is easier to use as well, along with being backlit on both the GT and GT Plus models. Smartphone connectivity is standard as well on the GT and GT Plus, but I believe you have to pay extra on the standard bike. Now, all three of them get 5 riding modes, so Sport, Street, Rain, and 2 custom slots, and these can either be set through the dash or you can connect with the Yamaha app and do it all on your phone. There's cruise control as well, along with that 6-axis inertial measurement unit that I mentioned earlier, and that powers what they call a comprehensive suite of lean-sensitive rider aids. So look, some interesting updates here, and with the AMT and the automated headlight, you can see how especially the GT Plus is probably one of the most advanced bikes on the market when it comes to these new techie features. Thing is though, no prices as of yet. I think we're going to wait a few weeks for those. But for reference, the previous gen of the standard bike was around the 11 gram mark, the GT was around 13, and the GT Plus was around 15, so I'd expect similar prices, if not a little bit more, especially considering for the GT Plus that you now get that AMT as standard. As always, I'd love to know what you think of these bikes down in the comments below, and whether you think they've gone too far with the tech, or does it look like something you'd love to try. And I'll also put my review of the previous gen Tracer 9 GT Plus on the screen now, which, you know, there's a lot of carryover features, so it's still worth checking out. Do hit subscribe as well if you want to see more of the latest motorcycle news like this right here on MOTOBOB. A massive thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next video.